4:58 a.m. Queens, New York. Bronson Valerius stared at the Mont Blanc fountain pen in his hand, $3,000 of German engineering that felt heavier than a loaded gun. Spread across the greasy Formica table before him was a liquidation agreement worth $12 billion. One signature, and the industrial empire his grandfather had built in the aftermath of World War II, Valerius Power, would be carved up by vulture capitalists before sunrise. "I need more coffee," he muttered to himself, his voice hollow in the fluorescent-lit emptiness of the 24-hour diner. "And some goddamn ink for this pen." He was about to sign when a hand rough, chapped from years of industrial soap and scalding dishwater, slammed down on the signature line. Bronson looked up, startled, into the face of a waitress in a pink polyester uniform. Her name tag, slightly crooked, read Zoe in faded Sharpie. "This isn't just a bankruptcy agreement, honey," she said, her voice carrying that particular brand of exhausted cynicism unique to New York service workers. With her other hand, she poured him a fresh cup of coffee so cheap it could strip paint. "This is a crime scene. You sign that, and this fake $300 million consulting fee becomes legitimate debt. And you? You become an accomplice to federal wire fraud." Bronson froze, the pen hovering an inch above the paper. He looked up again, really looked this time, and saw something he'd never encountered in any Wall Street boardroom. Eyes like a wolf's, sharp, hungry, and absolutely unafraid. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered. The woman who called herself Zoe pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, uninvited. Outside, rain hammered against the diner's windows, turning the neon signs of Queens into bleeding watercolors. "Someone who's seen this playbook before," she said. "And someone who really, really hates being lied to." The diner was called The Last Stop, and at this hour, it lived up to its name. The only other customers were a cab driver nursing a hangover and a sex worker counting her night's earnings in the corner booth. The jukebox in the corner had been broken since the Clinton administration. Bronson Valerius looked like he'd been through a hurricane. His Tom Ford suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, and there were coffee stains on his Oxford shirt that his personal stylist would have wept over. At 34, he'd been groomed since birth to take over Valerius Power, sent to Exeter, then Harvard, then a brief stint at Goldman Sachs to understand the money. But understanding money and controlling it were two different things. "Look, I appreciate the concern," Bronson said, trying to reclaim some authority, "but I've had lawyers review this document for weeks. If there were issues." "Page 342, Schedule F," Zoe interrupted, flipping through the document with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. Her fingers stopped on a dense table of numbers. Kestrel Capital LLC. Consulting services rendered, $287 million. She looked up at him. "You want to tell me what kind of consulting is worth almost $300 million for a company that's supposedly broke?" Bronson blinked. That's a restructuring advisory firm. Bennett brought them in 6 months ago to help us navigate. Kestrel Capital was registered in Delaware exactly 7 months ago, Zoe said flatly. Registered address, 1209 Orange Street, Wilmington. "You know what that is?" Bronson shook his head. "It's the most famous mailbox in America. There are over 300,000 corporations registered to that single address. It's where you set up a company when you don't want anyone to know who really owns it." She pulled out her phone, a cracked iPhone 8 held together with duct tape, and scrolled through what looked like screenshots of public records. "Kestrel Capital has no website, no employees listed on LinkedIn, no office lease agreements in any state, and exactly one bank account that I can trace, which happens to route through 3 different shell companies before landing in the Cayman Islands." Bronson felt his stomach drop. Who are you?" Zoe's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Someone who used to do this for a living. I was a forensic accountant at KPMG. Senior associate. I specialized in finding exactly this kind of bullshit." Was. She poured herself a cup of coffee without asking, took a sip, and grimaced. "I made the mistake of being good at my job. Found some creative accounting at a client, turned out it went all the way to the C-suite. When I reported it, I got fired for cultural misalignment. Blacklisted." Turns out whistleblowers aren't as protected as the law pretends. She gestured at her uniform. So now I sling hash at 4 in the morning and try to keep my mother alive on a waitress's salary. Bronson looked at her, really looked. Beneath the exhaustion and the cheap uniform, he could see it. The intelligence, the precision, the barely controlled fury of someone who'd been chewed up and spat out by the same system he'd been born into. Why are you telling me this? He asked quietly. Because, Zoe said, leaning forward, I've spent the last 3 hours watching you sit here, staring at that document like it's a suicide note. And I've seen enough of these deals to know what this one really is. This isn't a bankruptcy. This is a heist. And if you sign that paper, you're not just destroying your company, you're helping someone rob it blind. She pushed the document back toward him. So here's my question, Bronson Valerius. Are you actually this stupid, or are you in on it? The question hit him like a slap. For the first time in months, maybe years, Bronson felt something other than resignation. He felt angry. Show me, he said. They moved to a booth in the back, away from the windows. Zoe spread the bankruptcy documents across the table like a crime scene investigator laying out evidence. Okay, she said, pulling out a cheap ballpoint pen. Crash course in corporate fraud, American style. You paying attention? Bronson nodded, feeling absurdly like he was back in business school. Chapter 11 Bankruptcy is supposed to be a lifeline, Zoe began, circling numbers as she talked. You restructure your debts, sell off non-core assets, emerge leaner and meaner. But there's a reason it's called bankruptcy protection. It protects the company from creditors while you reorganize. The problem is that protection can also be weaponized. She flipped to a page dense with legal language. The way it works, you file for bankruptcy, which triggers an automatic stay. Your creditors can't touch you. Then you get the bankruptcy court to approve a sale of assets to pay off debts. Sounds reasonable, right? Right? Except, Zoe's pen stabbed at a paragraph. The sale process can be rigged. You create a stalking horse bidder, someone who makes the first bid and sets the floor price. In theory, other bidders can come in and offer more. In practice, if you control the timeline and the information flow, you can make sure the stalking horse wins at a fraction of the actual value. She looked up at him. Your company's hard assets, factories, patents, energy contracts, are worth at least $8 billion, conservatively. This agreement sells them for $3.2 billion. Where's the other $5 billion going? Bronson felt sick. The debt. The debt is fake, Zoe said bluntly. Or at least a lot of it is. Look at this. She pointed to another schedule. In the last 18 months, your company has taken on $2 billion in new consulting fees, advisory services, and restructuring costs. All of it paid to companies that didn't exist 2 years ago. And almost all of it, she traced a pattern with her finger, routes back to the same handful of offshore accounts. Bennett, Bronson whispered. Your CFO? Yeah, probably. But I can't prove it. Not yet. She sat back, rubbing her eyes. The exhaustion was starting to show. The thing is, guys like him, they're smart. They don't just steal. They build a legal framework around the theft so that by the time anyone figures it out, the money's gone and they're protected by 17 layers of corporate shell games. Bronson looked at her. You said not yet. Does that mean you think you can prove it? Zoe was quiet for a moment. Then she said, my mother has stage 4 ovarian cancer. The good treatments, the ones that might actually work, aren't covered by Medicaid. I've maxed out 3 credit cards, taken out loans I'll never be able to pay back, and I'm still $140,000 in debt. She met his eyes. I'll be honest with you, Bronson. If you want to sign that paper and let them gut your company, that's your choice. I've got no love for billionaires. But if you want to fight back, if you want to prove they're stealing from you, I can help. Because I am very, very good at finding money that people don't want found. And what do you want in return? Zoe didn't hesitate. $150,000. Enough to clear my debts and pay for my mom's treatment. And I want it in writing, signed by you, before we start. Because I've learned the hard way. Trust in God, everyone else pays cash. Bronson should have been offended. Should have called security, had her thrown out for extortion. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. What are you doing? Zoe asked. Getting you a retainer, Bronson said. I can wire $50,000 right now. If you prove Bennett's stealing, if we can stop this, I'll pay the rest and give you 5% equity in whatever's left of this company. Zoe stared at him. You're serious. Dead serious. He looked at her. I spent the last 3 months getting pushed around by board members and lawyers and hedge fund managers. All of them talking at me like I'm a child who doesn't understand market realities. But you're the first person who's actually explained what's happening. He gestured at the documents. If Bennett's robbing me blind, I want to know. And I want to make him pay. Zoe was quiet for a long moment. Then she held out her hand. Deal, she said. But we need to move fast. That agreement gets filed in, she checked her phone, 6 hours. Once it's in the system, it's a lot harder to challenge. Bronson shook her hand. Her grip was strong, calloused. So, what's our first move? He asked. Zoe smiled. It was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted wounded prey. We're going to break into your CFO's computer, she said. And we're going to find out who the hell Kestrel Capital really is. They relocated to Bronson's apartment, a ridiculous penthouse in Tribeca with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson. Zoe tried not to gawk at the artwork on the walls or the kitchen that looked like it had never been used. Nice place, she said dryly. You entertain here often? I haven't been here in 3 weeks, Bronson admitted, booting up his laptop. I've been living in hotels near the office, trying to salvage the restructuring. He pulled up his company email. They suspended most of my access when the board voted to pursue bankruptcy. I can see my own emails and calendars, but I can't access financial systems or personnel files anymore. What about Bennett's computer? I definitely can't access that. Corporate IT locked me out. Zoe pulled a chair next to him. Okay, different approach. Does your company use cloud backup? Yeah, we use Microsoft 365. Everything's backed up automatically. Perfect. And Bennett has 365 too. Everyone does. Zoe cracked her knuckles. Here's the thing about guys like your CFO. They go to Wharton, they get an MBA. They think they're the smartest people in the room. But when it comes to basic digital hygiene, she shook her head. They're idiots. I guarantee you Bennett uses the same password for everything because he can't be bothered to remember multiple ones. How does that help us? Because, Zoe said, if we can figure out his password, we might be able to access his cloud backup through a social engineering attack. People reuse passwords across personal and work accounts all the time. Bronson looked skeptical. You want to guess his password? I don't guess. I deduce. Zoe pulled up a browser. What's Bennett's background? Where'd he go to school? Harvard. Undergraduate and business school. Family? Divorced. No kids. He's got a place in the Hamptons and an apartment in the city. Hobbies? Bronson thought. He was obsessed with crew when we were in school. Used to talk about it constantly. Had this single skull he was super proud of, won some big race with it. Zoe's fingers flew across the keyboard. What was the boat called? I don't remember. Something weird. A bird? Think, Bronson. This is important. He closed his eyes, trying to remember Bennett droning on about rowing. Kestrel. He called it the Kestrel. Zoe went very still. Say that again. Kestrel. It's a type of falcon. He had this whole thing about how kestrels are solitary hunters, apex predators. Kestrel Capital, Zoe breathed. The consulting firm. He named his shell company after his goddamn boat. She was already typing, pulling up Harvard's archived alumni magazines. What year did he graduate? Undergrad? 2011. Within minutes, she'd found it. A photo in the spring 2011 issue showing a younger, equally smug Bennett Reed holding a trophy, standing next to a sleek racing shell with Kestrel painted on its side. Narcissistic bastard, Zoe muttered. She pulled up the company's VPN login page. Okay, this is going to be technically illegal, so if you want to back out. Do it, Bronson said. Zoe typed Bennett's email address into the login field. Then, in the password box, she tried Kestrel 2011. Access denied. She tried Kestrel 2011. Access denied. Damn it. She thought for a moment, then tried Kestrel 11. The screen loaded. They were in. Holy shit, Bronson whispered. Never underestimate human predictability, Zoe said, her fingers already flying. Okay, I'm in his OneDrive. Let's see what our friend Bennett's been hiding. She opened his documents folder. Hundreds of files, organized with the obsessive precision of a man who believed in his own importance. We're looking for anything related to Kestrel Capital, Zoe said. Financial transfers, incorporation documents, correspondence, anything that links him to the company. They worked in silence, the only sound the clicking of keys and the occasional frustrated sigh. The sun was starting to rise over the Hudson, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Bronson, Zoe said quietly. I think I found something. She pulled up a spreadsheet titled KC_transfers_internal.xlsx. It was a masterpiece of criminal accounting. Hundreds of transactions, each under $10,000, funneled through a web of shell companies, structured to avoid triggering the Bank Secrecy Act's reporting requirements. He's sniffing, Zoe said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Breaking up large transactions into smaller ones to avoid detection. It's textbook money laundering. She scrolled down. The final destination for all the money, an account in the Cayman Islands registered to a law firm. Bronson leaned closer. Aurora Legal Services. I know that firm. Bennett's ex-wife works there. His ex-wife. Zoe looked at him. Let me guess. The divorce was super amicable? No drama. They're still friends, apparently. She handles a lot of his personal legal work. Zoe sat back. Jesus Christ. He's not even trying to hide it. The money goes to his ex-wife's firm, which means he can access it whenever he wants, but it's technically in her name, so it's not directly traceable to him. She turned to Bronson. This is it. This is the smoking gun. He's been systematically looting your company for at least a year, probably longer. The bankruptcy isn't a last resort, it's the exit strategy. He files Chapter 11, sells the assets to his own shell company at a fraction of their value, and then resurfaces in a year as the new owner of Valerius Power. Bronson felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Bennett and we were friends. Roommates at Harvard. I trusted him. That's why he picked you, Zoe said, not unkindly. Fraud works best when there's trust. The victims never see it coming. She downloaded the spreadsheet onto a USB drive. We've got evidence now. Enough to at least raise questions. But if we're going to stop the bankruptcy filing, we need more than questions. We need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this is fraud. How do we do that? Zoe checked her watch. The bankruptcy hearing is at 11 a.m. That gives us 6 hours. She stood up. I need you to make 2 phone calls. First, call your lawyer, whoever you trust, not whoever the board assigned you. Tell them we're challenging the bankruptcy on grounds of fraud. Second, call the FBI's white-collar crime division. Tell them you have evidence of wire fraud and money laundering, and you want to make a formal complaint. The FBI? Bronson looked shocked. That's serious. This is serious, Zoe said. Bennett's not just stealing from you. He's committing federal crimes. Wire fraud carries a sentence of up to 20 years. And if we can prove he was planning to use bankruptcy as a cover, add bankruptcy fraud to the list, that's another 5 years. She grabbed her coat. In the meantime, I need to go home, shower, and figure out what the hell I'm going to wear to a bankruptcy hearing. Wait, Bronson said. Where are you going? Zoe smiled. To wage war, Bronson. And if I'm going up against Wall Street sharks, I'm not doing it in a waitress uniform. Zoe's apartment in Jackson Heights was a studio that could charitably be described as cozy. The bathroom was so small you had to step into the shower to close the door. The kitchen consisted of a hot plate and a mini fridge. Medical bills covered every surface like snow. Her mother was asleep in the Murphy bed, her breathing labored even with the oxygen concentrator humming beside her. Zoe stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching. Margaret Morgan had been a librarian for 40 years, quiet, brilliant, beloved by everyone who knew her. She'd raised Zoe alone after Zoe's father died, working 2 jobs to afford a good school district and college application fees. And now she was dying because the American healthcare system had decided her life wasn't worth the cost of treatment. Zoe's phone buzzed. A text from her bank. Deposit received. $50,000. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. $50,000. More money than she'd seen in 3 years. She could pay off the most urgent debts, get her mother into a better facility, maybe even afford one of the clinical trials. Her mother stirred. Zoe? Hey, Mom. Zoe took her hand. How are you feeling? Like I've been hit by a truck. Margaret managed a weak smile. What time is it? Almost 7. I just got off work. You look like hell, sweetheart. Thanks, Mom. Real confidence booster. Margaret squeezed her hand. What's wrong? I can tell when something's bothering you. Zoe hesitated. Then she told her mother everything: the diner, Bronson, the fraud, the evidence, the money. When she finished, Margaret was quiet for a long time. You're going to do it, aren't you? She finally said. You're going to go after them. I have to, Mom. If I don't? I know. Margaret's eyes were bright. I'm not trying to talk you out of it. I'm proud of you. For not giving up. For still believing you can make a difference. She coughed, and Zoe helped her drink some water. Just promise me one thing, Margaret said. Anything. When? Bergdorf Goodman at 7:30 a.m. was a surreal experience. The store wasn't officially open, but Bronson had called in a favor, or possibly just thrown enough money at the problem, and a personal stylist named Clarissa was waiting for them in the 5th-floor executive suite. Darling, Clarissa said, looking Zoe up and down with the assessing eye of a general surveying a battlefield, we have work to do. 2 hours later, Zoe stood in front of a 3-way mirror and barely recognized herself. The suit was Armani, midnight blue, tailored to perfection, with a crisp white shirt and heels that added 3 inches to her height. Her hair, usually pulled back in a utilitarian ponytail, had been styled into something sleek and professional. Subtle makeup sharpened her features. She looked like she could run a Fortune 500 company. She looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom. How do you feel? Bronson asked. He'd changed too, a fresh suit, no tie, projecting the kind of casual authority that came with old money. Zoe turned to face him. Like I'm about to commit several felonies. That's the spirit. Clarissa handed Zoe a leather briefcase. For your documents. And here, she produced a business card holder. You'll need these. The cards read, Zoe Morgan, Special Advisor to the CEO, Valerius Power. I had them rush printed this morning, Bronson explained. As far as anyone knows, I hired you 3 months ago. You have full authorization to access company records, attend board meetings, and speak on my behalf. Zoe looked at him. You're giving me a lot of power. You've earned it. They took Bronson's car, a Tesla that drove itself through Manhattan traffic, while they prepped for the hearing. Zoe had printed out the evidence, organized it into tabs, and prepared a presentation that would have made her old KPMG partners weep with envy. Okay, she said, here's how this is going to play out. The bankruptcy hearing is mostly a formality. The judge will review the filing, ask some questions, and unless there are objections, approve the restructuring plan. And we're objecting. Loudly. We're going to walk in there and accuse your CFO of orchestrating a massive fraud. The judge will probably be skeptical. Bankruptcy fraud allegations are serious, and they slow down the process, which nobody wants. So we need to be prepared to prove our case immediately. She pulled out the spreadsheet. This is our nuclear option. It's proof of structured transactions, which is a federal crime. But the moment we show this to the court, it becomes a criminal matter. The FBI will get involved, the judge will probably freeze all assets, and the entire bankruptcy gets derailed. Good. Maybe. Zoe looked at him seriously. Bronson, if we do this, there's no going back. Then it will lawyer up immediately. This could turn into a years-long legal battle. Your company will be in limbo. You might lose everything anyway. I've already lost everything, Bronson said quietly. My reputation, my company, my grandfather's legacy. At least this way, I go down fighting. They pulled up in front of the courthouse, the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of New York, housed in a brutalist concrete building downtown. Zoe took a deep breath. Ready? Bronson asked. She picked up the briefcase. Let's go ruin someone's day.
The bankruptcy hearing was being held in a courtroom that looked like it had been designed to crush hope. Fluorescent lights, worn carpet, rows of wooden benches filled with lawyers in expensive suits carrying leather portfolios. Bennett Reed was already there, holding court near the front of the room. He was surrounded by his legal team, 3 attorneys from Skadden ARPs, the kind of firm that billed $1,500 an hour and won cases through sheer attrition. Next to Bennett stood Marcus Holloway, a partner from Quantum Hedge Fund. Quantum was this stalking horse bidder, the firm positioned to buy Valerius Power's assets at a steep discount. Bennett saw Bronson enter, and his expression shifted from smug confidence to confusion. "Bronson," he called out, walking over. "I thought you'd be, I don't know, drunk somewhere. What are you doing here?" "Objecting to the bankruptcy," Bronson said calmly. Bennett laughed. "You can't object. You're the CEO. You signed the filing." "Actually, I didn't. I was about to, but someone convinced me to read the fine print." That's when Bennett noticed Zoe. His eyes traveled over her suit, her briefcase, the ID badge clipped to her lapel. "And who's this?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your lawyer?" "Personal assistant. Special advisor," Zoe said, extending her hand. "Zoe Morgan. I've been reviewing the company's financials for the past 3 months." Bennett didn't shake her hand. "Never heard of you." "That's because you've been too busy embezzling funds to pay attention to HR updates," Zoe said pleasantly. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Bennett's smile turned into a snarl. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Bronson, but you're making a serious mistake. The board approved this restructuring. The creditors approved it. You're outvoted." "I'm not playing a game," Bronson said. "I'm exposing a fraud." Before Bennett could respond, the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Patricia Winters entered, a stern woman in her 60s who looked like she'd heard every excuse in the book and believed none of them. "Good morning," she said, settling behind the bench. "We're here for the matter of Valerius Power Corporation, case number 25, BK 42018. Counsel, please state your appearances." Bennett's lead attorney stood. Harold Chun, Skadden ARPs, representing the debtor, Valerius Power Corporation. "Your Honor," Bronson said, standing up, "I'm Bronson Valerius, CEO of Valerius Power, and I'm here to oppose this filing." Judge Winters looked surprised. "You're opposing your own bankruptcy petition?" "Yes, Your Honor, because it's based on fraudulent financial statements." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Bennett's face went red. "That's absurd." Chin sputtered. "Your Honor, Mr. Valerius signed the petition himself. He can't suddenly claim." "I was prepared to sign it," Bronson interrupted, "until my special advisor discovered that the petition contains materially false information about the company's debts and assets." Judge Winters held up a hand. "Everyone sit down. Mr. Valerius, this is highly irregular. Are you alleging actual fraud?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then I'm going to need more than allegations. Do you have evidence?" Zoe stood up. "Your Honor, Zoe Morgan, special advisor to Mr. Valerius. With your permission, I can present evidence of systematic fraud involving fictitious debts, undisclosed related party transactions, and structured financial transfers designed to evade federal reporting requirements." Judge Winters studied her. "You're not an attorney." "No, Your Honor. I'm a forensic accountant. Former senior associate at KPMG." Approached the bench. All counsel. They gathered in front of the judge, Zoe, Bronson, Bennett, and the lawyers. "Ms. Morgan," Judge Winters said quietly, "do you understand that accusing someone of bankruptcy fraud in my courtroom is not something I take lightly? If you're wasting my time, I will hold you in contempt." "I understand, Your Honor, but I'm not wasting your time." Zoe opened her briefcase and pulled out the spreadsheet. This document was obtained from the CFO's personal cloud storage this morning. It shows $287 million in payments made to a shell company called Kestrel Capital LLC over the past 18 months. She pointed to specific entries. Each transaction was deliberately structured to stay under $10,000 to avoid triggering currency transaction reports under the Bank Secrecy Act. That's called smuffing, and it's a federal crime under 31 U.S.C. 5324. Chen tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. Even if these transactions exist." "They do exist," Zoe said, handing the judge a printout. "I've highlighted the wire transfer confirmations. All of them route through 3 shell companies before landing in an account at Cayman National Bank. And you believe these payments are fraudulent? Judge Winters asked. I know they are, Zoe said. Because Kestrel Capital LLC was incorporated in Delaware 7 months ago by Bennett Reed's ex-wife, using his personal email address as the registered agent contact. The company has no employees, no office, no services rendered. It's a vehicle for siphoning company funds. Bennett exploded. This is slander. Your Honor, I demand. Mr. Reed, Judge Winters said coldly, I suggest you be quiet. Ms. Morgan, do you have proof that Mr. Reed owns this company? Zoe pulled out another document. Delaware corporate records showing the incorporation filed by Aurora Legal Services. That's Mr. Reed's ex-wife's firm. And here's a photo from Harvard's 2011 alumni magazine showing Mr. Reed with his rowing shell, which was named Kestrel. She laid them side by side. He named his shell company after his boat. It's circumstantial, but combined with the financial records. Your Honor, Chun tried again. Even if there are irregularities. Irregularities? Bronson cut in. He's been systematically robbing my company for over a year. The bankruptcy isn't a rescue plan. It's the final stage of the theft. Once the court approves the asset sale to Quantum Hedge Fund, Bennett's shell companies will buy them back at a fraction of their value. Marcus Holloway from Quantum stood up. Your Honor, Quantum has no knowledge of any impropriety. We were approached by the company's CFO, who happens to be the fraudster in question, Zoe said. Quantum may be an unwitting participant, but that doesn't change the fact that this entire proceeding is built on false pretenses. Judge Winters was silent for a long moment, reading through the documents. Finally, she looked up. I'm going to recess this hearing for 2 hours while I review this evidence more carefully. Mr. Chun, your client needs to prepare a response. Ms. Morgan, I want a full forensic breakdown of these transactions, sources, destinations, and any evidence linking them to Mr. Reed personally. She looked at Bennett. Mr. Reed, I strongly suggest you retain personal counsel. What's being alleged here goes beyond civil bankruptcy matters. If even half of this is true, you're looking at federal criminal charges. Your Honor, Bennett started, his voice shaking. I can explain. Save it for your lawyer, Judge Winters said. She banged her gavel. We're in recess. Everyone out. They reconvened 2 hours later. In the meantime, Bronson had made the calls Zoe suggested. First to his personal attorney, who was now sitting beside him, and second to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Bennett had also acquired new representation. A criminal defense attorney named Sarah Patel who looked like she could argue her way out of hell itself. But Zoe was ready. Judge Winters called them to order. Ms. Morgan, you have 15 minutes to present your findings. Zoe stood, connected her laptop to the courtroom's presentation system, and pulled up her slides. Your Honor, what we're looking at is a textbook case of fraudulent transfer under 11 U.S.C. 548, she began. Over the past 18 months, Valerius Power made payments totaling $287 million to Kestrel Capital LLC for consulting services. These payments violate generally accepted accounting principles in several ways. She advanced to the next slide. First, GAAP requires that all material transactions with related parties be disclosed in financial statements under ASC 850. Kestrel Capital is a related party. It's controlled by the CFO's ex-wife, who he maintains close financial ties with. The failure to disclose this relationship is a violation of Sarbanes-Oxley Act Section 404, which requires accurate internal controls. Bennett's new lawyer tried to interrupt, but Zoe kept going. Second, these payments were structured specifically to avoid detection. Each transaction was under $10,000, which keeps them below the threshold for automatic currency transaction reports. This is a violation of federal anti-structuring laws. She pulled up the wire transfer records. Third, the stated purpose of these payments, consulting services, is false. Kestrel Capital has no employees qualified to provide consulting. No deliverables were ever produced. This is textbook fraud. Payments made for services that were never rendered. She turned to face the courtroom. But here's where it gets really interesting. Follow the money. Another slide, a flowchart showing the path of funds. The payments go from Valerius Power to Kestrel Capital. Kestrel then transfers them to a company called Osprey Holdings in the British Virgin Islands. Osprey transfers them to Peregrine Trust in the Cayman Islands, and Peregrine deposits them into an account controlled by Aurora Legal Services, Bennett Reed's ex-wife's firm. She let that sink in. Now, here's the crucial part. Once those funds are offshore, they're effectively hidden from creditors, shareholders, and regulators. But they're still accessible to Bennett Reed through his ex-wife's firm. When this bankruptcy is finalized and the company's assets are sold to Quantum Hedge Fund at below-market prices, what happens? She advanced to the final slide, a mock-up of the proposed sale structure. Quantum buys the assets for $3.2 billion. But Quantum is partially funded by, guess who? A group of offshore investors that I believe includes Peregrine Trust. So Bennett's stolen money is being used to buy the company he just bankrupted at a fraction of its actual value. She turned to Judge Winters. It's the perfect crime. Use fake debts to force bankruptcy, then use stolen funds to buy back the assets cheap. In 2 years, Valerius Power reemerges under new ownership, and Bennett Reed is a billionaire. The courtroom was dead silent. Then Bennett's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, this is speculation piled on circumstantial evidence. Even if we accept that these transactions occurred, Ms. Morgan has presented no proof that my client personally benefited. Page 47 of the Delaware Incorporation documents, Zoe said, pulling them up. The registered agent's email address, breedfinance@gmail.com. That's Bennett Reed's personal email. I pulled it from a company directory from 2019. She looked directly at Bennett. You didn't even bother using a burner email. You just assumed no one would look. Patel tried to recover. Your Honor, even if Mr. Reed made an error in judgment. An error in judgment. Bronson stood up, his voice shaking with rage. He robbed my company blind. He betrayed 20 years of friendship. He's destroying 9,000 jobs and selling our patents to foreign competitors. Judge Winters banged her gavel. Mr. Valerius, sit down. Ms. Patel, your client is in serious trouble. I'm suspending this bankruptcy proceeding pending a full investigation. She looked at the bailiff. Call the U.S. Attorney's Office. We need someone from the securities fraud unit here now. Just then, the courtroom doors opened. 2 FBI agents walked in, followed by an assistant U.S. attorney. Your Honor, the AUSA said, Special Agents Morrison and Chun from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. We received a complaint this morning regarding potential wire fraud and money laundering at Valerius Power Corporation. Judge Winters actually smiled. Excellent timing. Agents, I believe you'll want to speak with Mr. Bennett Reed. The arrest was quiet, the way white-collar arrests always are. No handcuffs, no perp walk, just 2 agents politely asking Bennett to accompany them to the FBI field office to answer some questions. But everyone in that courtroom knew Bennett Reed was done. His lawyer tried to negotiate immunity in exchange for cooperation, but the evidence was too damning. The FBI seized his computers, froze his bank accounts, and began unraveling the web of shell companies. Marcus Holloway from Quantum Hedge Fund quietly withdrew his firm's bid and left the courthouse looking like he'd swallowed a lemon. Judge Winters formally suspended the bankruptcy proceedings and ordered an independent examiner to audit Valerius Power's finances. Bronson and Zoe stood on the courthouse steps, watching the morning turn into afternoon. We did it, Bronson said, sounding dazed. We actually did it. You did it, Zoe corrected. You could have signed that agreement. Could have walked away, and spent the rest of my life wondering if I'd been played. He looked at her. Thank you. For stopping me. For believing we could fight back. Zoe's phone buzzed. A text from the hospital. Your mother's been asking for you. I need to go, she said. Bronson pulled out his phone. I'll have my driver take you. I can take the subway. Zoe. He looked at her seriously. You just saved my company and probably put a criminal in prison. The least I can do is give you a ride. She smiled. Fine. But I'm buying you coffee first. Real coffee, not that diner swill. Deal. 6 weeks later. The office of the Chief Financial Officer of Valerius Power Corporation occupied the entire northeast corner of the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the Empire State Building, Central Park, and, on clear days, all the way to the Hudson. Zoe Morgan sat behind the massive desk, reviewing Q4 projections on 3 monitors. The independent examiner's report had confirmed everything she'd uncovered. Bennett Reed had stolen over $400 million over 2 years, using a network of shell companies and fraudulent transactions. He was currently in federal custody, awaiting trial on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, bankruptcy fraud, and securities fraud. His ex-wife had flipped on him immediately, accepting a plea deal in exchange for testimony. Quantum Hedge Fund had settled with Valerius Power for an undisclosed sum, rather than face questions about their due diligence failures. And Valerius Power itself? The company was rebuilding. The bankruptcy had been withdrawn. Assets that would have been sold for pennies on the dollar were still intact. Bronson was restructuring the business around clean energy, just like he'd always wanted. And Zoe was his CFO. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," she called. Bronson entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Brought you the good stuff. Blue Mountain, from that place in Midtown you like." "You're going to spoil me," Zoe said, accepting the cup. "That's the plan." He sat down across from her. "So, I have news. The board approved the new capital raise. $600 million, mostly from institutional investors who believe in the clean energy pivot. We're fully funded for the next 3 years. That's great news. There's more. I talked to the clinical trials coordinator at Sloan Kettering. Your mother's been accepted into the immunotherapy trial. Full scholarship, all costs covered by the foundation we set up." Zoe felt her eyes sting. "Bronson, it's not charity," he said quickly. "It's a legitimate research program. We're funding it because it's good science, and because your mother is exactly the kind of patient they need to study." "Thank you," Zoe said quietly. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, drinking their coffee. "You know," Bronson said eventually, "I've been thinking about that night. In the diner." "Yeah. What would have happened if you hadn't stopped me? If I'd signed that agreement?" Zoe considered this. Bennett would have gotten away with it. Quantum would have bought the company for a fraction of its value. 9,000 people would have lost their jobs. And you would have spent the rest of your life thinking you'd failed your grandfather's legacy. And you? I'd still be slinging hash at the last stop, drowning in medical debt, watching my mother die because we couldn't afford treatment. Bronson shook his head. "I don't think so. I think someone like you, someone that's smart, that's stubborn, finds a way out eventually. You would have landed on your feet." "Maybe." Zoe smiled. "But I'm glad I didn't have to find out the hard way." Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression softened. "It's my mom. I should take this." "Of course. I'll see you at the board meeting this afternoon." After he left, Zoe answered the phone. "Hey, Mom. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a slightly smaller truck," Margaret said. "The doctors say the treatment is working. Can you believe it?" "I can absolutely believe it," Zoe said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Not just for the job, or the money, or any of that. I'm proud of you for not giving up, for still believing that good people can win." Zoe looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, the city that had chewed her up and spat her out, then given her a second chance. "You know what, Mom?" she said. "I think maybe they can." After they hung up, Zoe turned back to her monitors. There was work to do, financial models to build, strategies to plan, a company to help save. But first, she finished her coffee. It was excellent coffee, rich and smooth, with notes of chocolate and caramel. Absolutely nothing like the bitter, burnt sludge they served at the last stop diner. But that night, in that greasy booth with rain hammering the windows and a desperate CO about to make the worst mistake of his life, that had been the best cup of coffee she'd ever had. Because it was the moment everything changed. The moment she stopped running and started fighting back. The moment she remembered who she really was.